All right, so we're going to pick up where we left off last class in just a moment, but I want to give a reminder and then make an announcement. So your reminder is that your first quiz is coming up. You saw that in the video lecture, so your quiz is ready to go. It will open up today at 5 p.m. and it will close at 1 p.m. on, I believe I made it the 8th, right? Okay. Let's see here. It covers any information from day 1 to anything we cover up to today. Got it? Okay, so that's your reminder for that. Everybody got that in your calendar so you don't forget? Now the other thing is, when we start today's lesson, I'm actually, because of, I've got to be gone next Thursday afternoon and a couple of things. I'm going to actually do conflict theory first instead of structural functionalism. So I'm going to be going a little out of order. So I usually do structural functionalism first and then conflict. And the reason I'm doing conflict first is because of your first reflection paper assignment. And since I've got to be, there's a couple of reasons. I've got to be gone next Thursday afternoon. And 2, when I show films in class, normally everybody's here, right? Tuesday and Thursday. What makes no sense to show part of start a film Tuesday and then finish it on Thursday, because either way, y'all aren't going to get all of the movie. Does that make sense? So, unfortunately, films are going to have to be watched outside of class. And so, kind of as a trade-off, is that I will, you'll have no class next Thursday. All right, so you don't have to be here next Thursday, but you'll be working on your first reflection paper assignment, which has everything to do with conflict theory. Has anybody in here ever watched the film Selma? No? I think there was like 1 or 2 for my Tuesday class. So Selma is about the marches back in the civil rights movement from Selma to Montgomery, and the struggles that they faced simply to try to get their right to vote. All right. So the assignment will make much more sense once we cover conflict theory, but I already have it posted for you so that way you can start checking it out. You go to content, and the folder is down at the bottom. It says Selma, your first reflection paper. The assignment's right here, and then there's your Dropbox. It'll be due September 14th. The film is available. You can rent it on Amazon, YouTube, and then it comes, if you have a premium subscription with Hulu, you can watch it there. It usually costs about, on Amazon it costs about $3 or $4 to rent. If anybody, I know y'all are cautious, but if anybody even is struggling with the $3 or $4, please come to me and let me know, and I'll work with you, okay? Because I hate having to make you do this, so you have your formatting requirements right here. I want you to give me a creative title. Don't just say Selma. I want you to come up with something unique. Minimum 2 full pages, excluding the title page. Proofread your work. And then your discussion questions. Even though they're listed here as numbers, you'll write it in an essay format. Everybody good? Okay. So be sure you open this up, take a look at it. And again, it will make much more sense once we finish the conflict theory section. But you have already been learning about privilege and oppression, the dominant group, the subordinate group. You've been learning about that, and even institutionalized oppression, and we'll go from there. So I just wanted to make you aware of that now. We'll finish conflict theory on, if we don't finish it today, we'll finish it Tuesday, and then no class Thursday, and the paper will be due on the 14th. So if you want to put it in your phone or your schedule, you can do that right now, if that's helpful for you. I don't mind when you're going out. It's where I keep a lot of my calendar. So, any questions? Okay. With that, we will get started. Now, I do believe at the end of the last class, I was explaining a video about what the coach asking questions. Do you remember that part? I was just grabbing that. So in just a little bit, I will get to showing you that video clip. But for now, we're going to transition into introducing you to one of the first female sociologists. Later in the semester, maybe next week or next couple weeks, I'll talk to you also about W.E.B. Du Bois. So if you've been reading your chapter, which you should be, he is the first African American sociologist. Did a lot of great work in sociology. So you got to give some major shout outs to your people that don't fit necessarily in the dominant group. So here we've got a woman named Harriet Martineau. She was a British sociologist. And she was all about advocacy and social change, as you see up there on the board. She told you she was British, so she was one of the first to introduce sociology as a discipline to England. Caffeine for the day. So for her, she argued that when one studies society, one must focus on all aspects, and once you do that, you need to focus on doing something about it. So she brought, I don't have markers. There they are. So target that when one studies society, you must study all aspects of it. You can't just pick and choose. All right? So focusing on political issues, religious issues, social institutions, and just to kind of introduce you to social institutions. This is not something she came up with. I'll write it over on this side, so you know, attribute it to her. I usually talk about social institutions when I teach on structural functionalism, but since I'm going to get to that probably next week, I'm going to go ahead and introduce it to you now. So any kind of social institution is something that remains relatively stable over time, and it meets the needs of society's members. All right, so social institutions are systems that remain relatively stable over time and meet the needs of society's members. And they are things that provide social order. Just with that definition alone, can anybody give me an example of a social institution? Think about things that are in place that provide social order, to keep people in line and to keep people together. I'll give you a hint. Where are you right now? School. Education would be an institution. It meets our needs, and it also provides social order in the sense that if we can read and write, then we can do good in society, we can contribute, we can be productive members of society, we can have jobs. So you can think about it as the institution of education. All right. Now that I've given you one example, what else can you come up with?
Churches.
Excellent. Religion. Because religion, whatever it is that you practice, whether it be Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, whatever, it provides a belief system for a massive group of people, and it keeps them cohesive and together. And when you have similar beliefs, you're more likely to get along with each other. Does that make sense? Yeah? Now, obviously, there is, from a different perspective, actually the conflict perspective, that that religion can cause issues, especially among people from different religious groups who clash. Okay? But yes, you can think of religion as an institution. What else keeps us in line?
Politics.
Politics. Okay. Okay. How about government? Politics, government. Okay. So our government is an institution. To be a little bit more specific underneath government, you could think about laws. Think about the judicial system. Okay. Okay. Even something like medicine is an institution. When you are in pain in the Western world, what do you do to cure that pain? Okay, take a pill, right? Take some medicine. That's the cliche classic name. You got a headache, take some Tylenol. You got body aches, take Bayer Back and Body, naproxen sodium. If you got depression, you take a pill. If you got anxiety, you take a pill. We love to treat our illnesses with any kind of medication, whether it's in pill form, liquid form, surgery, whatever. But in the Eastern world, how do they treat illnesses? They'll still use medicine here and there, but you ever heard of like some herbal teas and essential oils, or even have y'all ever heard of acupuncture? Have y'all ever had acupuncture done? No. I've not had it like full on done, but when we went to China, one of our cultural classes that we get to take was on acupuncture, because it's an alternative medicine. Okay, so institutions are also something that socialize us to keep us cohesive. So the Western world, we tend to look at pills and medication. The Eastern world like to look at alternative forms of medicine. That's how they're socialized. But anyway, the point I'm getting at is I got to try it again, not the full on, but just trying a few in your back, and if it's done right, it's supposed to alleviate certain types of pain. The first time I had just a few of them tried, it didn't hurt, but they did it. They put one in my arm. That was fine. In 2019, when I went, they tried it. They stuck some in my back. Oh, it hurt so bad. I thought it was good. I almost cried. But because they dug one of the needles really deep into my back, and I just about died, I thought. But that's a different belief system, just to kind of give you an idea. Even something like medicine can be an institution. All right. Family, marriage and family is an institution. Okay? So in the United States, or really in your Western world, when you are born and you grow up, what is expected of you when you grow up regarding family? To get married and then have babies, Whether or not you do it in that order, that's up to you, right? So, but here's the thing is, okay, marriage. And where we are socialized to believe in monogamy. What's monogamy? Y'all know this. One partner. Because monogamy is the gender-neutral term. It means that we believe that you should only be with one partner at one time. Now, monogamy specifically is referring to marriage, meaning you should only be married to one person at a time. Bigamy is where you're married to, one person's married to two. And then if you do the gender specific, it's when one man is married to many women, it's polygyny, Polyggyny. And if it's one woman married to many men, which is incredibly rare, it's called polyandry. So polygamy is generally what's polygamy, or more specifically, polygyny is what you've generally got one man married to many women. And that is the norm in many parts of the world. Now, whenever you learned about polygamy, one person or one man married to many women, how do you feel about that? I'm actually asking you, how do you feel about it? How do you feel about it? Be honest. Do you think it's weird, gross, disgusting, wrong, immoral? It's weird, okay? Anybody else be like, sorry, Logan, you're the only guy in here. And, but I like to ask my guys, like, how many of you would actually like to have multiple wives? And most of them kind of look at me like, hell no, one's enough. But it's a matter of different views. So the idea with marriage and family is that it keeps us doing the same thing. It provides stability. And then if you're married, whether you're heterosexual, gay, lesbian, whatever, that if you're married or together, that you've got a commitment and then you have children, that children ideally would have a stable home. Now we're talking about an ideal family. In the real world, all families have some sort of dysfunction, right? Okay, some far more than others. But the idea behind marriage as an institution is it's going to provide stability for the two people involved, and it's going to provide stability for the children. Okay, so I actually have a question for you. If you feel comfortable answering, how many of you actually have divorced parents? They've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4? Okay, gotcha. All right. Now, do we have anybody here whose parents have never been married, but they're still together? The rest of your parents still together? Still married? Now, was it their first? I'm curious. I'm being nosy now. I'm curious. Was it their first marriage? First marriage? Oh, that's impressive. That is shocking in 2020 for your parents' generation. My parents have been married only the one time to each other. 45 years. Can y'all imagine? But they provided a great stable life for us. That's the idea behind marriage and family. Now, let me be clear too, since I asked about divorce, parents with divorce, it doesn't mean that you're not going to develop properly or anything like that, but there can be consequences. I mean, there will be consequences of child development or things like that, but it could happen. You could even think of media as a social institution. That's how we, honestly, by today's standards, how a lot of us are socialized and get our information, our news, which is unfortunate because a lot of the news that's out there on any news station is really not all that good. It's not always accurate. A lot of your news stations are biased on any political side. It's unfortunate. The media is just not as good as it used to be. But aside from that, think about like social media. Social media provides a sense of interconnectedness, right? Sure, it can cause problems. That's another story, right? But do any of you use social media to keep in contact with people that are far away? I know I do. I use Messenger to talk to my mom a lot, back home in Texas. 900 something miles away. So yeah. All right, so with all of that said, that's going back to Harriet Martineau. When she says all aspects, she's talking about studying all aspects of all social institutions. But especially, one of the things that Harriet Martineau was known for was bringing to light not so much talked about issues that really needed to be studied. The largely ignored issues such as marriage issues, family issues, children, such as things like child abuse, domestic abuse, religious life, and race relations. Okay, so DV stands for domestic violence. Those were again, look at the time period. You're looking at the 1800s. This is a time period where abuse by the man against the woman, the husband against the wife, was not only the norm, it was expected. Okay? Now, this will actually kind of build into conflict theory. Do y'all know what the suffrage movement was? Anybody? The suffrage movement? Who said that? Anna. Women's right to vote. Yes. Hurrah! High five. Okay? Which actually, we just surpassed the 100-year anniversary. We women have now had the right to vote for 100 years in the United States. That's not a lot of time, y'all. That is not long. It was August 18th, 2020 was the 100-year anniversary mark. So, but alongside, really where the suffrage movement comes from too, is the temperance movement, which was all about bringing alcohol issues to light. Like it was expected at this time, it was expected that men drink beer from sun up to sundown. And because you couple that expectation and norm at the time, and also the norm at the time of domestic violence, that it was legally okay and expected for a man to quote-unquote discipline his wife, aka beat the shit out of her. And so women at that time mistakenly made the correlation that alcohol causes domestic violence. To be clear, alcohol does not cause domestic violence, but can you see why they would think that at that time? So that's what the temperance movement was all about. And really, that's why they wanted the suffrage movement, to get the right to vote, because they wanted a voice so that they can change alcohol laws. Does that make sense? Okay. And you can imagine that that caused a lot of conflict, yeah? Because women are part of which group? Dominant or subordinate? Subordinate. And men are part of the dominant group at that time. All right? So if you're up here, don't you want to stay up here? And if you're down here, don't you want a piece of that pie? That's going to create conflict. So do you think a lot of men were just, oh yeah, we're going to let you have the right to vote? Hell no. And there was also even a lot of women at the time who didn't believe that women should have, politics, that's a man's thing. So it's not just men that were against it. There were plenty of women that were against it because that's how they were socialized. Okay? But that's why it took such a long time for women to get the right to vote. They started in the 1840s. I just told you it was not until 1920 that women got the right to vote in the United States. That's a long-ass time, isn't it? Okay? That's a lot of conflict. That's a lot of battle. People died in terms of protesting. Hunger strikes. They were beaten in front of the White House. They were imprisoned wrongfully. So many things. Just to have a right to vote. I think I said it here before, and none of my classes run together, but I find it ironic. I don't even know if ironic is the right word. Strange that our country is supposedly built on freedom, yet certain populations of people have consistently had to fight for basic rights, things of value, privilege. Being able to vote is a privilege, something that all people should have, given you're a certain age. So not only have women had to fight for the right to vote, so have minorities, specifically African Americans. So it's really interesting because the 15th Amendment of the United States actually grants African American men, I believe, yes. It doesn't, so the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution prohibits the federal government in each state from denying a citizen the right to vote based on the citizen's race, color, or previous condition of servitude, which was ratified, in 1870, which tells you that African Americans were given the right to vote before women. But remember, women couldn't vote, so this is really African American men. Does that make sense? But I just told you that was 1870. Well, the Selma marches took place in the 60s. Why the hell are African Americans having to fight for the right to vote in the 60s if we have the 15th Amendment? Does anybody know?
Jim Crow.
Sorry?
Jim Crow.
You got Jim Crow at place, and that's where you had all of your states, especially southern states, adopted new state constitutions and enacted laws that raised barriers to voter registration specifically for African Americans, which is, a part of Jim Crow. Okay? So, going back to, something as simple that you take for granted is voting. Let me see, how many of you are registered to vote? Excellent. If you are not registered to vote and you're able to, please do. Because even if you don't believe, if you're of the mindset my vote doesn't count, I really don't care. Exercise your right. Because you know what? People died for you to do that. Especially if you're black, African American, if you're a woman. And you'll see that in Selma. It's specifically related to African Americans. But if you watch another excellent movie, it's called Iron Jawed Angels. It's got, y'all know who Hilary Swank is, the actress? Y'all are youngins. Highly recommend this movie. It illustrates the latter version of the suffrage movement. Alice Paul. Okay. But in here we're going to watch Selma. Well, on your own time, but for class. But anyway, back to the whole point, kind of just fight for the right to have equal access to education and all of these things. Safety in the damn home. That's a privilege. Everybody should have safety in the home. But that's something that we have had to fight for and still have to. We have laws, but the domestic violence laws are still the penalties that go with it are still, they're not great. They're not good enough. They're not good enough. So we're still fighting that battle. So things like that, women's issues, like I said earlier, race relations. These were largely ignored issues at this time period. So she did wonders for the field of sociology. All right. Now, on the other part, not only this is, okay, you need to study all of this, but again, studying it is not enough. What do you got to do with it? What's that? Say it again?
You have to change it.
You have to change it. You can't just study it. Once you've got the knowledge, you've got to do something with it, which is why I like that quote from Leonardo da Vinci. It's not just about knowing, it's about doing. Okay? Because things don't change if we sit on our butts and be like, well, that's just the way it is. And you know what? When you do that, the dominant group benefits when you have that attitude. They're relying on you to have that kind of mentality. Because if you're like, oh, that's just the way it is, are you challenging the status quo? Are you challenging the way things are? Men being in control, not letting people vote because they're black. Dominant groups benefit when you don't question things, okay? And that's what Harriet Martineau was all about. So with that, I'm going to transition into the conflict perspective. Now, I want you to go back to your definition, just a kind of a recap on grand theory, okay, in your notes. Somebody tell me, what is a grand theory? So these three things that we're studying are grand theories. Anybody? Anybody? Who wants to tell me?
Were you asking what a grand theory?
Tell me what it is.
It's an attempt to explain large-scale relationships and answer fundamental questions.
Exactly. About how and why society operates, how it formed, how it changes, all kinds of those things. So these three perspectives are very different ways of viewing how the world works, why it works, who gets to choose, and those sorts of things. So we are still trying to explain things, but we're trying to explain how society works from different viewpoints, and each one is very different from the other, okay? So, in terms of conflict theory, these are some of the questions that a conflict theorist would ask. How does society divide a population? How do advantaged people protect their privileges? How do disadvantaged people challenge the system seeking change? You could probably already sort of start answering these. You tell me, how does society divide a population? Two groups. Who said that? Anna. The dominant subordinate group. You got two groups. We split you up. You can probably sort of already answer the second one. How do advantaged people, the dominant group, how do they protect their privileges? Any guesses? All right, I'll give you a hint. You see government over there? People in power are in the government, right? And people in power get to decide what?
Laws.
They get to decide the laws. They make the laws. They make the penalties that go along with each law. They make the rules and regulations. And so by default, they're going to create laws that benefit themselves and laws that are going to keep others subordinate. Okay, think of the example of the new Jim Crow that I gave you. So we can't legally discriminate against people based on color, so how are we going to go about doing it? We're going to use the loophole in the 13th Amendment, come up with petty, stupid laws, and then like things like vagrancy laws, and targeting specific groups of people, and sweep them up en masse, incarcerate them. There's even a statement from one of, I'll go ahead and show it to you. It's in another set of PowerPoints when I teach race, ethnicity, and criminal justice. Let's see, spring 2019. There is a statement. Yes, right here. Nixon, former President Nixon, the one who, war on drugs. So this is an alleged quote by Nixon as stated by one of his top advisors named John Ehrlichman. And this is published in a lot of places. So when it says alleged, it probably was said. Okay. It says the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. Former Nixon domestic policy chief John Ehrlichman told Harper's writer Dan Bond for the April cover story, "You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." And we still see that today. I think I made a statement in, I think, last class, that whites in number and percentage are more likely to not only use drugs and sell them, but who's incarcerated at 13 and a half times the rate? African Americans. Yeah. In fact, let's see, I have some other numbers I can give you. Today, African Americans only make up 13% of the population, yet make up almost 40% of the prison population. Do you see a problem with that? It's disproportionate. When I gave you the definition of racial disparity, y'all remember that? Okay, you're shaking your head yes at least. Okay. Racial disparity in this criminal justice system exists when the proportion of a racial or ethnic group within the control of the system is greater than the proportion of such groups in the general population. To give you something to compare it by, whites make up about 67% of the U.S. population, yet make up less than 40, I can't remember how much percentage of the population, but there's a difference. If it were proportional, only 13% of the prison population would be African American. Now we can ask the question, well, do minorities commit more crimes, or are they targeted more for crimes? That's where research comes in to help you answer that question. And then the question then also becomes, well, if they are more likely to commit crime, why so? Does it have anything to do with the social structure and how society has been constructed from historical perspective up to today? And the answer is yes. Okay. We'll look at that especially much more in depth in the race and ethnicity chapter. Something else to think about, you might, well, here's the thing. On the first set of slides, whenever it talks about like the halo effect, selective observation, things like that, there's a bullet point that says common sense. Common sense would tell us, oh, okay, well, if we look at the prison population, they're mostly populated with poor and or minorities. So common sense will tell us that that the crime problem is by those who are poor and or minorities. Is that correct? No. There are a ton of rich people that commit crimes and are not in prison. Do you know why? Any guesses? Have y'all ever heard of white-collar crime?
I've heard of it.
You've heard of it? White-collar crime is essentially crimes by people in positions of economic power. Economic power doesn't even have to mean high up. It could mean something as simple as you have access to money at your job. Okay? But typically you're looking at people like higher-ups. Yes, you're looking at CEOs. You're also looking at doctors, public servants, even clergy. And there's a process that's called weeding out the wealthy. Okay? Weeding out the wealthy helps us to explain why we don't see more rich white people in prison. Because there's certainly a whole lot more that deserve to be there but are not. Okay, so the first one goes like this. Their behavior is not even defined as illegal. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. If their behavior isn't even illegal, they certainly can't get in trouble for it. So, have any of you in here ever heard of fracking or hydraulic fracturing? Raise your hand if you've ever heard of it. You have? You have? You have. Fantastic. You want to give it a go? Just a sentence about what it is? Yes? No? Okay. So, fracking, which is just the word they put together for hydraulic fracturing, where you find places in the United States to drill all the way deep down into the earth for natural gas. And we do that because that way we don't have to rely on foreign countries for oil and gas. It sounds great, right? Woohoo, we don't have to rely on foreign nations. Great. But there are many, many consequences, and you can watch this, and it's in a documentary called Gasland. I believe. I can't remember if part one is, if the first part is still on Netflix. I show it in White Collar Crime for this very reason. When I teach White Collar Crime in the spring, what's happening there is not illegal. Fracking is not illegal. But what happens is they pump all of these chemicals down into the earth to break up all the stuff, to bring the natural gas up. Then up comes what you call produced water, which is full of chemicals. Long story short is that people around the areas where there's fracking, their water catches on fire. Is that normal? I mean, come on, y'all. What? People are getting sick, and not just sick like, I got like a stomach bug for a day, like cancer, hair falling out. It's affecting animals too. I'm giving you this version. The film, and there's also part two, is quite long. Okay, there are a lot of nasty, nasty human costs to this. So yeah, while it might save us money in the short term to use natural gas, in the long term, can you put a cost on human life? No. If you did, I would be worried about you. You cannot put a cost on a human life. Okay? That behavior is not illegal. You're not even going to get in trouble for it. And who's benefiting from something like fracking? Is it us people down here? People in positions of power? Absolutely. Now, something else, another side effect of fracking is earthquakes. Earthquakes are not normal in Texas. And we started having earthquakes around 2008, right around the time that they started doing all this fracking in certain areas of Texas. And certain earthquakes happening around in the northeast. And then there was just one just a few weeks ago that hit like Tennessee, Pennsylvania, Virginia. Did y'all ever hear about that in the news? No? Okay. But anyway, you get the idea. Now, step number two of weeding out the wealthy is, if their behavior is defined as illegal, they are less likely to get caught. And just to remember, BX is an abbreviation for behavior. You tell me why. Why are they less likely to get caught?
They have money.
There you go. They have money. They're educated. And when I say educated, I mean you're talking about your formal education. You can be smart and educated without going to college, okay? But highly formally educated, thus they're likely to have a lot of money. Not always, but what that means is that they've got money and means to hide evidence. Because in a court of law, it's not about what you did, it's about what you can prove. So if you're able to destroy evidence that's on computers, and you shred paper and you burn it, there's nothing to prove. You can't prove anything, and therefore you're not going to get in trouble. Money is also a factor. That kind of comes on more along the lines of number 3, is that if they are caught, well, hold on just a second. White-collar crimes are also known as sweet crimes, S-U-I-T-E, crimes in the sweets. Okay? Their crimes oftentimes are very complex, they're hidden, and they're behind closed doors. They happen in your big fancy buildings. Your street crimes are very obvious. Murder, rape, robbery, Your property crimes, burglary, arson, motor vehicle theft, larceny, those things are very visible, right? If you go to Walmart, you can, if someone's shoplifting, they're not very good at it, you can see that, right? You are a witness. Cameras probably see it. Same with all your other street crimes I just listed. Here, they're not likely to get caught because of this. It's happening behind closed doors. Crime in the suites. Okay. Now, number 3, if they are caught, they are less likely to even be charged. So I know that, the majority of you are not criminal justice majors and don't plan to be. So I don't expect you to, I don't know what you know about the legal system, all right? But if you're caught with a crime and if there's enough PC, which is probable cause, you can go, the prosecution or the DA's office can charge you with crimes and they bring it forth before a grand jury. And if they have enough PC, probable cause, they will indict you. That's what an indictment means. If there's not enough PC, they'll no-bill it and the charges are dropped. Doesn't mean they can't bring charges later. All right? Why would they be less likely to be charged? What did I just tell you about evidence?
They'll pay you to get rid of it.
Yeah, they know how to get rid of it. They're good at destroying it. It's very complex. So yeah, if you don't have enough evidence, you can't charge people. You just can't. I mean, I guess technically you can, but you'd be unethical to do so. Number 4 is, if charged, less likely to be convicted. And that has to do with who's the one that said money? Lynn, very good. It has to do a lot of times with money. So let's say, and most court cases are actually pled out. They do plea bargains. Okay? You're likely to get a lesser sentence when you do a plea bargain. It saves time, money, you don't have to go to trial. Nationwide, only about 5% of cases even go to trial. 95% are pled out. So it's not really like what you see on Law and Order. If Law and Order were accurate, it would go like this. The judge would be like, how does the defendant plead? Guilty. And then you hear the end of the Law and Order song. Right? Have y'all ever watched Law and Order? Some of you have. That's more accurate. Not everything goes to trial. And this, the Conestoga Judicial Circuit, Whitfield and Murray counties, only about 1% of all cases even go to trial. It's very rare. Anyway, point being, back to money, is that not only can they pay for a high-powered defense attorney, they can pay for high-powered defense teams. Think of O.J. Simpson. Y'all know, please tell me y'all know who O.J. Simpson is. Okay. Do y'all think he did it? You say yes, yes. Do y'all know enough about the case to make a guess? It's a really fascinating case. Anyway, he had probably the highest paid defense attorneys in the country. Johnny Cochran, the Kardashian dad. If you ever wondered how the hell Kardashians got famous, it's because it was Bob. Bob's his name. Bob Kardashian was one of the defense lawyers. High-powered attorney. So there's your fun trivia fact for the day. Okay? What that means is, if you are a private defense attorney, you can charge people thousands of dollars an hour to work on their case, which means you're making a lot of money, and I can turn down your cases. I don't need your money. I got this case, and it means you can work solidly on a year or more on one case. Versus people who are poor and cannot afford an attorney get a public defender. Now, this is not a knock at public defenders because they do good work, they do hard work, and they are very underpaid. What that means is they've got caseloads of like 150 to 300 cases a year. A year. Do you know the national average of time that a public defender gets to spend with his or her client? Give me a number. How much time? Give me a guess. How much time? Just guess. I don't even care if it's way off. Doesn't matter. How much time do you think they get to spend with their client?
Maybe just a couple of them.
You guessed a couple of hours? You're very close. You're actually very close. 15 minutes is the national average. Could you imagine your criminal case and your attorney gets 15 minutes? Usually the first time you meet is at your arraignment. Not even before that. To put that into perspective, we are in this class for 75 minutes. You probably spend more time studying for a test than that. And you are holding someone's life in your hands. So keep that in perspective. Now, that's a pattern. It's not always that way. Just because you pay lots of money doesn't mean you're not going to get convicted. It doesn't mean you're going to get acquitted. It doesn't mean you'll get convicted of lesser charges. But that's a general pattern. All right, and the fifth and final one is where we're getting at. If convicted, what do you think the punishment is like?
House arrest?
Sorry?
House arrest?
Yeah, stuff like house arrest, probation, fines, community service. Maybe a couple of years, it's the running joke in CJ's, we call it club fed, any type of federal prison. No prison is nice, but if you were to pick which prison to go to, you'd want to go to a federal and not state. It's a lot nicer. Still not a cakewalk, but. All right, so if convicted, likely to get a lenient sentence. Rarely do we see people go to prison, much less for long periods of time. So I could actually tell you an example of institutionalized oppression today would be private defense attorneys versus public defenders. All right? The Sixth Amendment guarantees you the right to a fair trial. It gives you the right to counsel. But it doesn't tell you, you're supposed to have quality counsel. But here's the thing. We all know having a public defender is not the same as paying a private defense attorney. Does that make sense? And that's guaranteed by our Sixth Amendment. So if you look at the definition of institutionalized oppression, are your day-to-day practices, policies, laws that are meant, or maybe not meant, but that impede or limit minority members' achievement, keeps them in subordinate, disadvantaged positions. Okay? You might go back to that, people shouldn't commit the crime in the first place. And you might be right. But later in the semester when we get to talking about crime and deviance, we'll look at the theories as, well, why would people commit crime in the first place? What pushes people to do that? And a lot of times poverty is part of it. Well, who's already more likely to be in poverty? By race and ethnicity. Come on. I said it in the last class, if you watched the video. Who is it? African Americans, or more really minorities in general. Yeah, absolutely. So that's that deeper level thinking. You don't just look at the surface. Okay? All right. Another example of institutionalized oppression would be, a current example would be how our public education system is set up. I think I covered this actually on the very first day of class. How are public schools funded? Very good. High five. Property tax. Y'all remember how property taxes work? So you got a rich neighborhood over here. Means that property taxes are higher. So you got more money going into that school district. Over here, you've got a poor neighborhood. You've got less property tax going to this school. fewer resources to this school than this one. That equates to less technology in school, less resources like books. It has nothing to do with the quality of teachers. I want to be very clear about that. It's not really about that. Lack of access to guidance counselors, teaching. In your poorer districts, you generally have families who have not been to college. They might have, their parents might be high school dropouts. My mom is actually a high school dropout. She got pregnant. She dropped out, I think, in 10th grade. So, anyway, and then the federal government is involved in a little bit in terms of grants. That the government will give your poorer districts grants to help out. But here's the thing, is that even with those grants, the rich schools still have more money than your poor schools. Do you see a difference in that? You see a problem with that? And that is something that is a policy and rule that's put in place, and nobody has really challenged it. That's why they have actually tried, what is it? I don't know what y'all did here, but when I was in school, it was called like the busing system, where you could actually pick which school you wanted to go to, rather than the district that you lived in. Has that ever happened around here? No? Okay. I believe they were called Robin Hood laws, because what did Robin Hood do? Is that his name, Robin Hood? Yeah. What did Robin Hood do?
Stole from the rich to give to the poor.
Stole from the rich to give to the poor. Now, I don't really like that they call that, but that's the thing, is they're trying to equalize the opportunity. People might view it as stealing wealth from the wealthy to give to the poor, but I want you to think about children. Children don't get to pick, all right? They don't get to pick. So it's about giving children a chance at equal opportunity. Does that make sense, everybody? I'm going to show you that video now in terms of life chances and set up right here, turn on the volume. All right.
Hey, line up! Line up! Everybody line up! We're about to race! Everybody line up! Shoulder to shoulder. Take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up. We're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. A $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability. You don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I've said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go! If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
All right. What he just illustrated was privilege and social structure. So does seeing that help you to kind of visualize how things are set up in society to advantage some and disadvantage others? Yeah. Again, remember this passage is about challenging what you have been taught to believe your entire life. All right, so conflict perspective. All right, here's where you start. This perspective sees society as an arena of inequality, which I've been talking about almost since day one, that generates conflict and change. And I'll tell you a little bit about conflict, that it's not necessarily a bad thing, and it is inevitable. Something about that first part. Conflict is not necessarily bad, y'all. Things don't change unless there is conflict. Conflict is also inevitable. It's going to happen. So if we look at this definition up here, you've got groups in society, and when we're talking about groups, this is what we're talking about. Oop. This is what we're talking about down here. These types of groups: whites versus non-whites, men versus women, rich versus poor, straight versus LGBTQ, even young versus elderly, and non-disabled versus disabled. Probably next class is when I'll use the disability example to really just illustrate you probably the best way possible of privilege. Okay, but back to the definition. Groups in society are engaged in a continuous power struggle for control of scarce resources. Scarce resources are things, again, they are things of value that everyone should have. So you remember that list that we had from privilege? What are things that everyone should have? Healthcare, education, food, shelter, respect, equal treatment in the law. You know, you've got Lady Justice who is blindfolded. The blindfold is supposed to represent that the court system does not treat you based on race, gender, religion, social class. But is that reality? Hell no, not even close. Not even close. There is so much institutional oppression built into the criminal justice system. You just have to look and analyze it to see it. Now, and social order, so each perspective is about how social order is maintained in society, okay? Structural functionalism will have a very different perspective of how social order is maintained, and symbolic interactionism will have a very different perspective in terms of how social order is maintained. For conflict theory, social order is maintained by domination, coercion, and power. And I want to be very clear that these don't even have to be physical. It's not even physical domination. It's mental domination is what that is. Mental domination comes from purposely not educating people. I already told you in a class or so ago, what's the easiest way to control people?
Lack of education.
Exactly, lack of education. Uneducated people are the easiest people to control, especially if you keep them, they can't read, they can't write. Even if they can read and write, maybe they're not taught critical thinking skills. All right? They're the easiest people to control because they don't question things. And that's what the dominant group is relying on. So, things like getting the subordinate group to believe that the things that are put in place are natural. That's just the way it is. And this is done very subtly through the socialization process from a very young age. I'll give you an example of this a little bit. All right, status quo, that means that's the way it is. So, getting the subordinate group to believe that the way things are is normal and natural, purposely not educating because then they're less likely to question the status quo. This is achieved through, as I said, the socialization process. So think about whenever you were born. Think about the things that you were taught. You don't have to tell me. Just think. Think about the things that you were taught by your parents, and then as you got older and were exposed to other people, say when you're a teenager, now that you're young adults, you were like, what my parents told me was kind of wonky. It was whack. It's not true. Did y'all ever experience anything like that? Anybody? I see some people shaking their heads. So a historical example to get you to understand what I'm talking about is, you all know what monarchies, right? Monarchies are, right? Okay, kings and queens. So historically, you've got royal families. So somewhere, at some time, you had somebody say, oh, I'm royalty. And then you have descendants. And you socialize the other people in society who are not royalty they believe that they are not royal by God's will. It's called the divine right to rule, is what especially the English monarchy came up with. They came up with the idea of the, quote, divine right to rule, which means it was God's will that my family is royal and you're not. And so if you're raised to believe that from a young age, are you ever going to question it? Probably not. Especially historically when you deny people education. It took a long time for that kind of system to change. Yeah, you still got the Queen of England, and technically she has power, but it's the Prime Minister that runs things. She could technically overrule at any time, but she never has. She never has. It's more of a symbol anymore, okay? So that's what we mean by domination. And then, of course, when you're in positions of power, and when you are in positions of power, you're able to coerce people to do things. All right? Does this make sense? If it doesn't, or you have questions, what are they? Because I don't really see a lot of people shaking their head, yeah. So, can I explain it to you in a better way? Does it make sense? Okay. All right. So it's really just kind of us versus them sort of thing. And I think the next slide is introducing you to Karl Marx's theory of class conflict, which I'll probably get to. I'll start on Tuesday of next week. But you've got your people at the top, people at the bottom. They clash and they create conflict, which creates social change. I'll leave you with this. Any type of social movement, suffrage movement, temperance movement, civil rights movement, the rights for LGBTQ, have all come from questioning the status quo, protesting and demanding change. Absolutely demanding it. You'll see that on, which slide is it? Right here. Freedom's not going to be given voluntarily by the oppressor. You have to demand it. This is actually, you'll see a scene, this scene reenacted when you walk Selma, okay? All right, y'all, I hope you have a fantastic day, weekend. I'll see y'all next week.